Hi, I'm Kara Tang from Portland Community College, and I'm pleased to present this lightning talk at SIGCSE 2022 titled Computing Verbs to Enhance Bloom's Revised Taxonomy. My co-authors are Marcus Geisler, Christian Servin, and Cindy Tucker. Many people may be familiar with Bloom's Revised Taxonomy. There are 6 levels of cognition. Starting from the bottom, we have remembering, then understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. These represent the level of cognitive depth a student is expected to achieve for a given competency or learning outcome. There are verbs associated with each level that are often used in crafting learning outcomes and competencies. For example, at the remembering level, list is a common verb, at the understanding level, explain, and on up to at the creating level, develop. This project has the goal of enhancing the verb lists with verbs to support computing disciplines. This project was conceived in summer 2020, and the straw dog, the first draft of proposed verbs, around 90 of them, was presented at last year's SIGCSE as well as various other venues. There was a survey, we got a lot of feedback, and this feedback was incorporated into the next round, which is now available, called the Iron Dog draft. This report has 76 verbs, and it is available for public review and comment, and we are very interested in seeking feedback from all different computing disciplines on which verbs you think would be most useful to add to these standard verb lists when writing competencies and learning outcomes for computing disciplines. This table shows a selection of the new verbs at each different level of the Bloom's Revised Taxonomy. In this talk, I'll give just a few examples of how some of these verbs could be used. We'll take a look at the verb backup, measure, trace, and refactor. And as you can see, backup and measure are at the applying level, trace is at the analyzing level, and refactor is at the creating level. When you take a look at the Iron Dog draft of this project, you will see for each verb a brief explanation of why we thought this might be a useful verb to add to the lists, and also at least 2 sample learning outcomes for each verb. So backup is a common computing task, especially in system administration and data security. Sample learning outcomes include backup multiple local or remote files and folders to a backup volume, and backup marked data to a remote location using an automation script. Now we'll take a look at the verb trace. This is certainly something common in computer science, tracing code, and it could also be used more generally. Trace, as we see up here, is at the analyzing level, so representing a little bit deeper of a level of cognition than applying. And sample learning outcomes could include trace a variable's value as it changes throughout a code module, trace an activity to detect the condition that creates a deadlock, or trace a list attached or linked to personnel who are not allowed to access any part or function of the system. For this next set of examples, we actually took a couple of learning outcomes that appear in CS 2013, ACM's guidelines for undergraduate computer science programs, and we reformulated them using one of the new proposed verbs. So in this first example, the learning outcome that appeared in CS 2013 reads, use refactoring in the process of modifying a software component. With the new verb lists and the verb refactor available, we could reformulate that to be much more direct and simply say, refactor a software component. In the second example, the learning outcome from CS 2013 reads, explain what is meant by best, expected, and worst case behavior of an algorithm. One thing we find is that a lot of learning outcomes utilize the verbs explain and describe. These are verbs that are found at the understanding level in Bloom's Revised Taxonomy standard verb lists, but a lot of times we actually want students to express the skill with a little more cognitive depth than that. So in this case, we reformulated this with the new proposed verb measure, which is found at the applying level. We could say measure best, expected, and worst case behavior of a given algorithm. How can you help? We would love it if you would review the Iron Dog draft and provide your feedback. You can find the Iron Dog draft at ccecc.acm.org/bloomsiron-dog or use the QR code on the right. And please answer the feedback survey to give us your input on what you think about these proposed new verbs and whether you would use them in learning outcomes and competencies. And you can go to that URL or use the QR code at the right for the survey. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to receiving your input on this project.